Welcome everyone to our second FutureGaze, the future of artistic practice with Cristina Spiteri of Brightside Studios. So let me tell you a little bit about Cristina. She is a 3D artist and director and co-founder of Brightside Studios with Susanna Murphy. Brightside Studios is a creative agency and works with projects for museums, galleries and theatres, as well as interior designers, architects and broadcasters. Cristina started earlier on in life in studying multimedia design at Northumbria University, 2002 to 2005, and then has since worked on a number of motion graphic design roles over those years until branching out with Brightside Studios with Susanna in 2015. So before we say hello to Cristina, let's see what Brightside Studios does with a lovely showreel provided by Christina and Susanna. Gosh, I just love that showreel. It gets me so excited. Welcome, Cristina. How are you feeling? How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm very good. I'm really excited to be part of this chat.
You're surrounded by plants. We're communing with nature already. So welcome. Let's take you back to the start, to March last year, at the beginning of this pandemic, which we obviously couldn't believe was occurring around the world, and then arrived on our shores. And the reality started to percolate through around about 10th of March last year, talking about lockdown and working from home. And then 2 weeks later that occurred. What was going through your mind and your heart? How were you feeling about how it would affect you making your practice, your artwork? What had you in the planning at the time? How did you reorganize yourself? Could you get in the studio? Could you see Susanna? So how did you adapt?
Well, I mean, it was a shock, wasn't it? It was a shock for everybody. But interestingly, Susanna is Irish. Her family are all in Ireland. So before we had the news here, we'd been hearing it through her family in Ireland. And Susanna was actually already working from home because we'd been hearing this message about how serious it was from there, whilst we were getting the contradictory message in the UK. So that was quite interesting. So yeah, working from home, and I think just trying to take stock what jobs do we have on, reaching out to the teams, which jobs are going to be paused, which jobs are going to be cancelled, which jobs can we complete, and kind of getting things in place. So thinking about the jobs that we had on, we had Elemental for the Science Festival. The Science Festival couldn't continue, that job was paused, but in a way that we hoped we could pick it up again, so the team were poised to go. We had a large scale LED facade that we, in a building in Glasgow, that we got completed, but didn't actually see the work until many, many months later, which was an interesting experience. In a way quite nice, because you were seeing it with fresh eyes, which was kind of cool. And we had Ghosts, which was a really interesting one in that it could continue because there was two threads. There was a large scale building projection with audio for storytelling, which is a format we really enjoy using. And there was an augmented reality, a self-guided experience using your phone on the streets of Glasgow that actually worked within the restrictions of the lockdown. You could do this experience on a walk with your device.
Oh, great.
So it was an experience that could continue outside of the theatres. So that was, suddenly there was more emphasis on how important it was.
Right.
So,
yeah, absolutely. And what about your home life and working from home and juggling everything?
Well, I mean, at the time I was quite heavily pregnant, so that certainly had, there was a lot of other stuff going through my head in relation to that, which was quite nerve-wracking.
Of course.
Would my husband be there at the birth? Things like that. They're really significant. So there was all of that going on, and then just creating a space to work from and setting up, you know, because we were still working on Elemental, so I had to set all the sensors up around my house, get all the kit in there, and do that from the living room as opposed to being in the studio where we had, you know, more of the setup. So just adapting, really, isn't it?
Yes, that reminds me of Elaine Ford, who did a space and satellite artist residency at the time, had to pivot those to digital, and many of the artists had to move to working from home, but Elaine started doing stuff in the bathroom with salt crystals, and I just thought it was just, you know, the lengths that the artist went to complete the work was fantastic, and you did the same. So as lockdown progressed and we started to get, I suppose, a little bit more used to the routine and what it meant, and then you started to maybe think about what effect is this having, and thoughts were starting to percolate. As an artist, you're obviously looking at the world around you and you're influenced by that, but you also have something to say about it too. So I wondered how that started to then influence the work. I mean, you mentioned Elemental that you paused on. Did that period actually change what Elemental eventually became?
It did in some practical ways, in regards to we like to use sensors that kind of bridge that gap between the digital and the interaction, so breath sensors or your heart rate or movement. And we were using a breath sensor in this instance, which you know, it's not something you could do, would be to blow in a breath sensor. So we had to rethink that a little bit. But I think we developed the creative further to be even more beautiful, more otherworldly, slightly more surreal, because it felt like we needed that, and it felt like the audience might need that kind of so I think it became more beautiful and more
Why
surreal.
don't we let Catherine actually play a little bit of that so our audience today can see what it is that you're expressing here, and maybe you can talk a little bit over what you're saying there.
Well, it's very immersive. So this sequence here where the stars are pouring out of the primordial soup, we call it, it's kind of fog pool in the middle of the space. It really gives you a visceral sense of floating. It's quite illusionary. And so that's the base when you first come in. And yeah, you can see here's the fog. The idea is that you can be very playful. You're actually given little hand fans now rather than blowing on
right. Good idea.
So you can use those to interact, to blow the fog, to catch the light. But you see here, it's about the elements, the 4 elements, and each of those interacting, and through collaboration, you unlock the 5th element, ether, which is quite exciting. And you see the kind of the classical elements drawn onto the floor. And the thing we were interested in was the synergy between the modern elements that we have, the periodic table, and then the classical elements. And actually, they weren't that far off, the way they gripped things and the way they were looking at things. So that was kind of what we were really interested in.
So you're taking us back to what it is to be human. And that's on at the Science Festival at Summerhall to the 11th of July, and it's free, and there's still places available if you'd like to go along. And as we're talking about that, we're all thinking, well, this is a slow easing, slow return to something. It won't be normal, but it'll be something closer to normal maybe than we had imagined. And venues and galleries, etc., are opening up, and we're out and about a wee bit more. I was wondering how that slow easing, you didn't know where the needle was going to be. The festival's in July, it was looking good, and then the Delta variant picked up, so then not so much. So could you maybe describe how you worked around the practical considerations to deliver this to an audience safely?
Well, yeah, I think I think it's paid off to be careful about how it's been organised, and the Science Festival have been very careful and considered about how it's delivered. So one of the elements is that that you attend in a bubble. People that your bubble, you now go with them, whereas before it would have been you might have gone with a friend, but there could have been 4 strangers in the space. So that changed the experience slightly, in that we had hoped to encourage collaboration between people that had never met, but actually the bubble means that people are probably a bit more comfortable in the space to play with it. So there's, slightly different. And then the practicalities of timing, how people come in and out of the space, choosing an implement like the electric fan so that it could be cleaned, and those types of practicalities, and slight compromises had to be made as well. We had kind of wizard cloaks that people were going to be wearing in this space to add to the theatre to catch the projection, and that we couldn't do that, but that's fine.
Yeah, and you also have people there to help, because I went along on my own, and I didn't realise that all 4 sensors eventually trigger a 5th element, and so the staff from the Science Festival, they're lovely. They do the explanation of all the elements as well, but they then help you to trigger that so you can get the full experience. I thought that was very thoughtful, because people's bubbles might be 2, 3, but in this case you need 4, but they're willing to step in and help that to happen. So I think that's great. They're part of the show.
Yeah, absolutely. So
as we can see, you're working with cutting edge technology, creative technology as part of your daily life. And for us, as artists, creative practitioners, we work with digital tools, sure. And then many of us now are working with digital tools, regardless whether it's part of our job or not, because the world's had a huge digital stretch. Teams, Zoom, Slack, everything's just gone up. Our relationship with tech has evolved, and we've had to learn all these new platforms. As we've gone through successive lockdowns, maybe we've gotten a bit more comfortable with some of it. And then we started to actually consume entertainment and music and some theatre events, etc., online, and exhibitions online as well. So I was wondering, what impact do you think this is having on audiences as we get used to this, or do we like it? Are we thinking it's a good thing? And how we might want to consume creative and cultural experiences going forward. Just wonder what you felt about that.
But it's really positive that people are more open to kind of grabbing new tech and using it and engaging with experiences with that kind of technology. And I hope that continues as the kind of traditional formats come back. But it's all about connection, really. And I think that maybe what we've realized is that these digital tools, these social tools that, we said social, but maybe they were kind of seen as anti-social prior to the pandemic. We've actually properly harnessed those. Just thinking of like video games as an example, something that's probably seen as a bit antisocial, actually has been a great way for people to connect and speak with pals.
Yes.
And, so I think that's really interesting. But what I would like to see, and I hope is an area that is explored, is the space between the venue, the traditional venue, the screens that we've been using in our homes, and this big space in between where we could be layering artistic expression and digital storytelling into the environment around us into the outside world using our handheld devices, to bridge that gap between the real life and the screen, to kind of merge the two. And I do wonder as well how that could help with, things have eased here, but we still can't get to Canada to see family. How could that help to create meaningful experiences that we could share?
Yeah.
So I think that's an interesting space.
And I know that you and I have talked before this about work that we've found exciting that has maybe occupied a bit of this space, people experimenting with different ways to deliver. I mean, I got very excited about Chagall. I think anyone who's been following my chats generally, I'm so excited about Chagall because she's using motion capture, she's using Mimu gloves to trigger the music, she's using her body sensors to trigger avatar that she's created in a 4D capture studio, and now she's actually also performing with drones, and there's an extra trigger. So she's got so much that she has to operate, and it's becoming part of her dancer kind of body sense memory as she's doing it. And I think we'll share that in the chat. Another thing that happened during lockdown was RSC's Dream, where it was a performer avatar in the show, but she's actually off stage, suited up and doing all the movements. And so I just wondered what work you've seen that occupies the space and has excited you.
Well, one of them, it's actually not particularly techy, but I think it's a really interesting way of reaching new audiences, was by the New York Philharmonic Bandwagon. They did 1 and 2, but they got a truck, they put a big LED screen in it, they got an amazing sound system, and they took the music to communities around.
Oh, fantastic.
And access people who possibly wouldn't have accessed that before. So I think that's really interesting. Nowhere to Call Home, I thought was interesting, because I guess on that kind of dual aspect, they had during the day you could go in and see the photography and the storytelling, but at nighttime the buildings were lit up with the story and the audio, and that happened in different locations.
And that's the National Theatre?
The National Theatre, yeah. And blindness was an interesting one too, which they were able to tour because they had tailored that to a kind of pandemic situation with socially distanced kind of sound and stuff.
It's on at the moment, actually, Edinburgh Festival Theatre right now for a few more days. So that's interesting that people could go and see that.
Yeah. And the fact it can tour,
And you mentioned another one, window swap.
Yeah, that one I think is really interesting. Again, and it's very simple when it comes to the tech, but in the height of the lockdown, when we were all sat looking out of our windows as our kind of only view into the world, and this simple idea, but you recorded the view out of your window for 10 minutes and you uploaded it. And then
I would have loved that. It's like, could you show me please a beach, or Florence, the Duomo, or Paris? I would have loved that.
Well, the great thing is there's a randomness to it. So you go onto your computer and you click, show me a different window, a different view. And suddenly you're looking out of a farm window in Australia. And then you click again, suddenly it's, it's crazy busy streets in a really far-flung city. And that was interesting in itself, but there was a sense of connection because you were looking out of their window. You felt connected to them, which I just thought was...
That's a lovely idea, actually, isn't it? Yeah. And you also said you were inspired by the work of Aaron Coblin. I hadn't come across him before.
Yeah, he's got loads of work, and he's doing really clever stuff about connecting people. So, for example, a bicycle built by 2000, where it took thousands of people's voices to create this piece of music, and using digital technology and data and AI to do that. So he's doing some really interesting work where you all come together to create something, and it's a real sense of proper connection. So I think his work is really worth a look.
That's lovely, and I know that Kath will help everyone who's listening to partake of those things that we've talked about by posting the links later. So as you're working with creative technology, what do you see as the future of artistic creation using these tools and these means to express your artwork and what you want to say, and this passion that you're conveying now that you want to touch and connect and communicate with audiences? And what are you also seeing as a reaction from the audiences to the actual work using creative tech?
I think that one of the things that's interesting is the amount of data that is out there that we are seeing day in, day out around the pandemic. It's quite frightening often. It's very dry. It's not telling much of a story other than to kind of it just scares you a little bit. But I think there's a lot of stories that could be told with that. And I think that art has a really important role in healing from things that are traumatic as a society. So I think that data will be really interesting as the dust settles and artists start to kind of mull things over and start to maybe pick out bits of those data and start to tell stories in a visual way with those that reflects back to people kind of what's been going on, helps us to understand a little bit more what's kind of been happening. And I think audiences are really, people are looking for experiences. You know, our life's been simplified. So I think people are seeking that out in a way that is interesting. But I think really, one of the things that I think is really important is using technology to genuinely connect with people in a meaningful way who can't physically be together. And that's something that's going to continue into the future. So we've kind of always thought that, yeah, we see family who are abroad maybe once a year, and bar that, there's a couple of phone calls. But actually, I think we could do better. There could be more experiences where we genuinely feel connected that are different to that. And I think we need lots of artists doing that to create that kind of more of a real life feel to the digital artistic space.
And so as you're considering all of this in the sense of connection and getting past distance, I was wondering if you're thinking about the potential of mixed reality or immersion, just VR, or being out in the world with AR, the potential of 5G, or even AI working in a creative form as Jake Elwes does. Just wondering what tools you've got your eyes on.
Well, I think the combination of something as simple as people now being a lot more used to the idea of scanning a QR code and then something happens on their phone is really interesting. The fact that my dad can now do that is really interesting, because that would have been a barrier before. And with 5G, when that is much more accessible, the fact that you could simply by scanning a QR code suddenly you could have that amazing rich video content, or apps that are quite hefty, but they could almost immediately be on your phone running and giving you incredible experiences in a way that is more less planned, could be more spontaneous, which I think that's the joy in life, and that's what's been stripped away. So I'd like to explore that, and thinking about our cultural institutions, museums and art galleries that have all of these amazing paintings and artifacts often stored away. How could we maybe use those so that we've got the real life venue in all its glory when we can go and see it, but could we take that content, could that be a digital layer throughout the city, or could we tell a story using that, using augmented or mixed reality? I think that would be a really cool thing to explore.
Yeah, I think that actually is quite fascinating, thinking about that, thinking about the stories of peoples from our own towns and cities, and being able to follow that through the archives. But there's trigger points, maybe where they lived and where they studied and then where they performed, and you could actually do a trail, and it's getting me thinking about all of that, like you were suggesting. It's fantastic. And I guess that makes me wonder, what is percolating through your mind now on how you might make work, because you're talking about the distance and the connection. Do you think there's an appetite for the duality of hybrid, some physical audience, but also it's being available digitally if the audience member feels more comfortable accessing it digitally? Do you think there's an appetite for creating a sort of two-layered experience so that people can engage in different ways?
Yeah, I think so. I think having that variety is important. just thinking about people who physically can't go on and access something, or even the people that are currently feeling very anxious still and may continue to feel anxious about being in public spaces. So having that duality could be really important. But again, I think I'm really interested to see how artists and creative tech people explore how we could do that in a maybe more interesting way, develop that further past the screen. So
I know, because you love to work with sensors and things that trigger, so that it's almost like an immediate engagement that's quite natural and organic.
Yeah, and I think there can be a simplicity to it as well. So, you know, thinking about being in a space that you're seeing the lights are going, but it's the heartbeat from somebody in a city on the other side of the world who's holding those sensors. So you have that connection with that person. You know, could we create an experience using haptic technology, sense of touch? Could somebody touch you from far, far away? You know, like, I think that I'd be really interested to see how we can create those real moments of connection.
And that brings, again, the wonder and mystery and fun back into it, rather than sort of sterile on a screen, even as we are today, chatting to each other by screen. So I wondered if you had any other reflections that are percolating maybe within you now about your artistic practice and the use of tech to deliver experiences. What have you got planning or forming in the back of your mind for your next work?
There's quite a lot bubbling away. I do really, though, think that art is a very important part of, can be an important part of healing from something that is kind of traumatic. And I think we'd like to create something that is reflective on what we're going through and where we've been. But also on the flip side, I also feel a drive to create some more stuff that is just really exciting, an escape, surreal, beautiful, fun, just takes you away, gives you that sense of lightness in a time that has been quite dark and continues to be uncertain. So there's a real kind of pull towards creating those types of experiences for people just to be transported.
Yeah, and it would be great to be able to come into a space like you've done with Elemental, or even an outdoor space like a marquee or a dome, and you can enjoy this immersive escape in a safe way. So I was wondering also what you feel you need to equip yourself with, or if you feel that there's tips that you might want to share with others who are thinking about how they can bring work using creative tech and in a safe way as we come out of our lockdown restrictions. Do you have any observations or tips or things you think you need to equip yourself with or others with in order to go on this journey?
I guess if I have any tips, it is actually probably about being a bit practical about the constraints that we have, and then using those. If you work with those constraints in a creative way, you can make the most of it. And so I'd say that's an interesting thing. So those constraints pose a challenge, but a creative challenge often leads to really exciting ideas. So I'd say kind of look at the constraints we have and try and work within them and see how creatively you can maybe come up with something even more amazing than if we could just all be together, you know, loads of people in the same space. So
yeah. And I've noticed that Unity and Unreal are being used an awful lot now as the engine for all of this. And I was just wondering if that's now you're thinking that might be an essential skill set. Do
you know forward. What? I think you're right. And Unity is a program we've been using for quite a few years now. As soon as we started to work with sensors, Unity came into play, VR and AR. So yeah, I mean, it's totally essential for us, Unity. And I mean, it's such a vast program, but equipping yourself either with the coding or the creative skills so that you can team up with the coder and together really, really explore what can be done. I mean, traditionally it's for making video games and things like that, but I think that the more the artists kind of grab hold of it, I think we'll see lots of interesting things come out of that platform.
And so what are the discussions that are happening then now between you and Susanna, because you work as a team, and is there things percolating between you and Susanna that you're thinking about in terms of Brightside Studios' next range of work?
I think kind of everything. Yeah, I think everything that we've discussed really. But Susanna has also had a baby, so she will be back shortly, quite soon, and I'm really excited to sit down and have a really good think about the next steps. So
Yeah.
so they're that's an exciting time.
And there'll be feedback for you to discuss from Elemental as well. And I wondered if you've had any early feedback from the Science Festival or from audience members.
We have, and it's been really, really positive. People have really enjoyed it. So that's great. Yeah. So that gives, I feel we're on the right track there.
And I noticed that it's free, and obviously everyone's been in that quandary about the digital experience. How do you price it? And that's starting to evolve, but it's free for the Science Festival, and people can donate, which is lovely. I'm wondering if you've had thoughts about the business model moving forward, if you were to do exhibition work, how you feel that the digital price point comes into play.
It's a really, really interesting question, because we don't really expect to pay for apps or pay much. So yeah, I don't have an answer, but I think that yeah, donations are interesting. I think there's probably a whole area that could be explored there, but people are reticent to pay for apps.
I think that's interesting, isn't it? Because you are creating your work using creative technology, and therefore there is a physical, but there's a digital opportunity as well. And as you say, it makes it accessible. It travels across boundaries, makes people feel safe if that's the concern. And you wonder, well, there should be a value for that, because for you, there's a limited physical ticket income. So you actually kind of need the second layer to help soften that. And that's what theatres are considering at the moment, is how they can open and music venues viably. And so I've started to look at other things online and looking at the price points. And I must admit, even myself, I went, £26, do I want to pay £26? And so I have paid 20, and I've paid 11, and I've paid 5. But I must admit, I did kind of go, I did have a pause for thought when it got slightly higher.
Yeah, I guess it's about getting used to doing it, isn't it? And it's
Yeah.
also about language. If you say, hey, we've got an app, that doesn't sound particularly exciting, but if it's communicated properly as to what it really is, it's an experience, it's a storytelling experience, you know, you're going to be exploring the environment. I think really helping people understand what it is. I think with technology, one of the things that happens sometimes is, because a lot of people that work in technology have all the lingo, that communicating what you're actually doing in a way that people really understand can be tricky. And I think it's actually really important to think about how you communicate it so that people understand the value, rather than it's an app and it costs £15. I'm not sure about that, but it's a theatrical experience that you're going to be going on. It's 1 hour long, and it's all the rest of it, so people really understand the value. I think maybe that's one of the things. And then, as you say, the culture, getting used to paying for things.
Yeah, and I've noticed that there's a sense of ephemeral about a digital thing, and you're there, it's gone. I'm used to that because I was a dancer, and you go to dance and it's in your imagination, you can't take it away with you. So I kind of like that. And as a singer, I prefer to be live, never really did any recording because I like the moment. But I've noticed that non-fungible tokens, etc., is making it like, this is a keeper. This is a digital thing, and I'm keeping it. And that's cool, it's very interesting. But I'm wondering if we are filming things, if there's an opportunity for a business model where we get to keep the digital reminder, or if there's a souvenir. You go to a music venue and you might buy the CD or the T-shirt. So I'm wondering, is there a digital takeaway, like you're going to this digital performance, but you get a digital reminder as a keepsake? ? Is that a thing?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting point. but having that, because we know that people want to capture it themselves for social media. There's a lot of value in showing people where you've been and what you've been doing.
Yeah.
So having something that's kind of well put together that people can access, and maybe there's a cost associated with that, but it's been captured in such a way that it's
or it's built into the ticket. Because I know that if I was like at a gig and there's a sea of phones doing this above my head, I'm like, I get frustrated. It's like, could you just please be in the moment? Put your phone away and imprint this on your memory through your eye gate. And you'll get your souvenir later that's professionally filmed.
I really do think there's something in that, because also the more that you do that, the more that you realize you don't tend to look at that content very much, and it doesn't often look that great or sound that great. So you've got in a habit of doing something that actually you're not really getting a huge amount from afterwards. So I think there's definitely something in that.
There's something in there, and that makes me lead on to my next question for you is, if you do start to deliver things digitally and online, or have that capture to offer as an experience online, would you ever evolve to the point where Brightside broadcasted or made available digital experiences for your own fee income as a ticket? So Brightside becomes an experience platform, and I could come on and buy a ticket to watch what you did with Janice Claxton Dancers and enjoy that beautiful production that you made, or Elemental again. And just wondered if that's even crossed your mind.
Do you know what? It hasn't, but this is why I love having conversations with you, because it sparks lots of ideas. So that's another thing to kind of be thinking on.
Don't mean to change your business model, just thinking about the future of artistic practice and the fact that we're creating these digital experiences, and wondering about value in business model, because all of us creatives have had a difficult time during lockdown making income, or being on the floor, or not making income at all. And so actually looking at the business model as we exit is an interesting thought. So we've got questions in the Q&A. So Kath, over to you to fire these at us.
Hello. They've all flooded in then at the last minute, which is great. I can't see a particular kind of like thematic sense to them, so I'm just going to fire through them, Christina. So the first one came in from Caitlin, who was asking, do you work digitally outside of your artwork? So are you a pen and paper organizer, or is your workflow all online? I think it's a good question.
I like to start with a moleskin and a pen and start sketching. It's the easiest way for me to get ideas down, and that does sometimes expand to my iPad and a pen. But I think just getting things down in that loose way, getting lots of ideas down to start off with, I think is how I like to work before going onto the computer.
Good question, Caitlin.
I just wanted to interject. When you start to then plan a project, when you've actually come up with a concept, do you move to a workflow tool, a digital tool, to plan the work that you make for others, or do you and Susanna actually use like a storyboard?
We create that all ourselves. Yeah, we kind of create documents as we go, and we kind of break our work into stages. So yeah, we kind of create those storyboards ourselves.
Yeah, it still feels like an artistic way through, rather than as the questioner was asking about digital. Yeah. Actually, there's still a paper and pen and story feel to the way you develop the work.
Absolutely. If you dive straight into the digital, then you could be creating yourself a lot of work and not giving yourself the chance to experiment.
Interesting.
I think that ties in. No. I think that ties in nicely to the last FutureGaze conversation we had about the future of work, and we maybe all be collaborating online now, but actually, is that like that kind of heart of collaboration and being with people and writing things down and scribbling and whiteboards? I know that's something I really miss about collaborating with the team. So I can see. Yeah,
the design agency we spoke to were saying wanted room for group ideation, where you can bounce ideas around and work out what the design should be. So it sounds like there's a parallel there.
Yeah. Okay, another question on a similar theme, actually. It's this kind of in-person versus virtual. So Charles asked, how easy is it to integrate the in-person and the virtual consumers at the creative event when it's a mixed format? And Charles says, and as an event producer, I feel this. It seems to me easier to be one or the other, but hybrid event can be more problematic. How do you get real connections between the two groups? So I'll be taking notes here, Christina.
Well, I think the thing is that isn't something I'm trying to think. Yeah, that's not something I've particularly organized as such. You know, when we've done stuff where it's the mixture of, it might be, say, Message in the Skies for Hogmanay, where it's got the real world attending, and then it's captured with video and shared online so people can see that story that way. But we haven't done an event which in that way where it's ticketed.
Yeah, the only one I've seen, well, I mean, not that my experience is wide, but the only one I've seen where there's a connection between the digital audience and the real audience is in music. And there was an event that was held by DICE in a venue in Amsterdam, and there was a video screen wall of all the people who'd paid the extra ticket to be on the wall. And then there was a whole bunch of people who were the front rows were on their screen watching in the front row and paid a premium for that. And they were able to engage with the artist, and the artist would turn around and speak to them, and they were able to share their best track, and then the person would sing it, and they were able to sort of say what the song means to them, and then they would sing it. And then the front row audience obviously were also being talked to by the artist. That's the only time I've ever seen that kind of combination of engagement. So I think it's a creative challenge, like you were saying, Christina. Work with the restraints, and you'll, with the mother of invention, you'll come up with a way to do things. But that's the only one I've seen is in music.
The only thing I can think of is, I don't think it even is quite what Charles is hitting on, was Fox Studios, who did, for the Creative Informatics Showcase, they did a demo of their game. I think it's called Robo Chef. So basically, the Fox Studios were in the room together with all these incredible contraptions, and we were on an app doing things, and our character would like drop onto the screen, and you got randomly selected. And I could see that being moved to like there's maybe real people in the room who are representing you, and you're kind of controlling the person. But even then, there's, you know, I don't know if it quite achieves that collective experience in the same way.
And there is a way in Fortnite to watch music in cinema, and you can be avatars, and you're with, and you can talk to people in the seats with you watching the same show. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and Becca actually from our team in the chat says comedy also does this really well, because Zoom audiences get as much interaction as in-person audiences on shows like Mock the Week. So it's happening, but it is hard to achieve in that kind of event space. I can see what you mean, Christina. A couple more questions coming in. These ones seem to be about the kind of business financial side again. Caitlin's written a wee bit, so I'm just going to read that out. So when talking about financial valuation on digital products, the conversation can be so out of your hands. It's not something you can necessarily control. It's a cultural artifact from evolution, and then how our digital spaces have been controlled by large tech firms. What would be your dream, and what do you think is achievable for charging for digital works? It's quite a big question. you can have some time to think if you like, Christina.
I guess when it comes to charging for work, my dream is to be able to create what we are dreaming of, and to be able to do that, we need people to pay to fund it. It would put more control in our hands if we knew that we could finance our work that way, as opposed to through a funding route. So I don't know what the amount would be, but I think the dream is that we could get people to pay what it actually costs to create these works, because it's a lot of work and technology is expensive. So I think the more that we have the value, the people see the value and get used to the idea that they could pay for that, rather than it being funded through an arts council or something, could open up a lot of doors.
And the fact that it has a longer tail. If it's a digitally available product, it could be there for quite some time. So similar to music, there's the cost of making it, and it might be a higher value. But then as it gets played, there's a royalty that accrues over time. So there's a long tail. It may be that there could be a similar digital value at the moment to be part of it, but there's a secondary value as you leave it, if you like, online available.
I also think maybe to do with being able tour your work, or the time that goes into creating it in one space, but then seeing it as something that could then happen somewhere else, so that you can get more value and reach more people with one piece of art.
So the next question has me wondering, because I want to ask the question back, what is Superblue?
Do you know Superblue, Christina? So Karen Forbes has asked, what are your thoughts about Superblue, a new business model for interactive art? So I had a quick Google and I found a post, which I think actually, Karen, it would be great if you could share some more links in the chat about Superblue, and we'll all go away and think about it and then bring it up in our conversations at our next networking events and this sort of thing, because I think it might be new to all of us here today.
I did look at a way to showcase my photography during lockdown, because I wanted to have a creative outlet, and I looked at Kunstmatrix as a 3D immersive platform, and you could locate and curate your images around it, and the person could come in and walk around literally as if they would in real world an exhibition of work. All right, it's still replicating the usual model, but I still felt like that was a nice way to present work, but it's not interactive in the same way, because obviously my work is not moving. It's just still and it would be lovely to get to holographic work. I would love to do that, and that might be a bit more engaging and maybe fit into what Karen is asking about. So Karen's given us some homework, which is good. I can't see any more questions, so I just want to say thank you so much, Christina, for being here today, for sharing your heart and your thoughts with us, and for sharing your work with us. And so thank you, and I wish you all the best with whatever creative ventures you and Susanna get up to next.